Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 57, and we're going to ask, is there a teacher shortage in Pennsylvania, United States of America? So my wife was going through some headlines this morning, and she saw a story on CBS News Philadelphia that said Pennsylvania is going through a teacher shortage problem. So in 2012, there were 16,000 new teachers that year, right? So basically all the people who graduated from education schools, colleges, and they went and looked for a job. And then in 2022, so last year, I guess it takes about a year to gather statistics. There were 4,200 new teachers, right? So it's like a third of the number of teachers. And so the headline was discussing how, because there is such a shortage, there's such a shortfall, that schools are hiring unqualified people now to fill positions. And I think if you read the fine print, they're looking at private schools, schools that are not under the same requirements of teachers as government-run public schools. Now, this is a bigger problem moving forward into the future, because as every year, as new teachers are hired, older teachers are retiring. Perhaps some teachers decide to quit. Maybe a handful of teachers are fired. It's pretty much impossible for that to happen, but sometimes I guess it does happen. And so you need to have sort of an equal number of new hires as people who are leaving the teaching field, sort of to keep the numbers stable, etc. One thing that they do not take into consideration, of course, is school closings, right? So if a school, closes its doors because either there are no students or, for other reasons, then, it's not that big of a problem. And some people are saying that that might become an issue moving forward. Now, public schools, because they are run by the government, they have so much bureaucracy. And because there's so much bureaucracy, it also means that there are a lot of people in administrative positions that want a piece of the budget for whatever it is that they want to have done. And so when something like a lockdown arises, the slow, sluggish public school cannot adapt so quickly. And obviously there are some public schools that are very forward-looking, very organized, and I wonder how their incentive structure is set up. But if you look at a large urban, an older city, and you look at their school district, it's yeah, they don't really care about the students, so it seems. There are too many things to worry about. There are too many special interests to protect in order for there to be a change in policy. In other words, as with all bureaucracies, once you start funding a program, it's very hard to shut it down, right? There are a lot of people who participate in it, who now are making a living from it, the income derived from that. And so to shut it down would to put a lot of people in a bad way. But that's all another issue. So let's focus on not having enough teachers. Is there really a teacher shortage? Can a state run out of teachers? Well, during the last 3 years, and a lot of teachers got freaked out and refused to go teach in classrooms. There was a shortage in Texas, right? So in 2022, there was a teacher shortage in various places in Texas. So Fort Worth, Texas, there's an article, I guess, on CBS News again, and the title was Fort Worth think outside the box, recruiting teachers from Mexico. And it's probably because there are a lot of Spanish-speaking students in Texas, and they needed bilingual teachers. And so that was kind of interesting. If you don't have anyone who wants to be a teacher in the United States, then go out of country. And so what is causing the sort of shortfall in teachers? A lot of people say, well, they're not paid enough. Teachers are paid pretty well, okay, if you also include all of the benefits. And so one thing that I like to say is teachers are often paid in deferred benefits, which they collect after they stop teaching. But having taught at a university for over 17 years, I realized, no, school teachers are paid an awful lot. I have a cousin who teaches elementary school, and I think she makes twice as much as what I make, right? I have a PhD, she does not, but she works for a public school and I work for a university. And so there's the big difference. And so a lot of teachers, they get into teaching because it pays a lot of money. So why would people, stay away from teaching? Well, because the working conditions are not that good. So these days, especially with absentee, also if you look at the major cities, the behavior of a lot of these students are just awful if they do show up. And so who wants to subject themselves to that kind of work environment? Back in the day, I grew up, where I grew up, I went to a parochial school. That is, I went to a private religious school, a Catholic school. I wasn't Catholic, right? But I went to a Catholic school because it was safer there, right? So going to a public school meant that you were going to get beat up because you weren't, American, quote unquote. So, when we went into the parochial school, the Catholic school, the nuns would beat you. They would spank you if you stepped out of line, if you didn't behave yourself. And so it was safer for people like me, right? So as long as you behaved well, you didn't get in trouble at school. But of course, you had to walk to the school and walk back from the school. And that was always kind of an adventure, having to walk through the neighborhoods of all the people who really don't like your presence in the neighborhood. But anyway, that's another story for another time too. So a lot of, but see, now you can't hit students, right? If you try to break up a fight between students, you get in trouble, right? There are all these things now in students' rights protections and all that kind of stuff. And so if there are bullies in the school, you can't do anything about it, because if you do try to intervene, you will probably get in trouble. And so the lunchtime, right, the cafeteria is where a lot of violence happens, right? You have people mixing, and there are a lot of fights that happen in the lunchroom, except there are no teachers there. Back in the day, there were cafeteria monitors, there were teachers there, but not anymore. And the reason is that if they touch a student, they get into a lot of trouble. And so basically, there is no way to enforce discipline or any kind of civil behavior in schools today. And so a lot of teachers are just simply staying away. Also, I know in Philadelphia, they are requiring all the teachers to go through, I think, trans sensitivity training or something like that. And so a lot of teachers are quitting because of that as well. Like they got into teaching to teach, not to have to toe the line and recite government propaganda for this issue or that issue, right? And whether you believe it or not is besides the point, right? Education should be a general education to get people ready for the next phase of life. So anyway, so it's not simply we have to pay them more. It's also because of the working conditions and the content that is being required for people to teach. So really, you never run out of teachers, right? It's not a shortage. it's because people don't want those jobs, right? Those jobs are not as attractive as alternate jobs. Look, even back in the 60s, the United States had a doctor shortage, doctor and nurse shortage. And so they started recruiting from all over the world. And so a lot of the early Asians that came into the United States prior to 1970, they were all skilled workers, right? Engineers, doctors, nurses, because they didn't have enough graduating from schools here in the United States. And so they started recruiting from other countries. And I saw that happening as well. A lot of the people who came off the planes, they were doctors and they were nurses. So it is not unusual for societies to recruit workers from other countries. And so when Texas started going into Mexico to try to get teachers to come up into Texas, I mean, that is, sure, that's old school, right? That's what people used to do back in the day. And I believe that the amount of money that was being paid to workers coming up from teachers coming up from Mexico would have been a lot more than what they were making in Mexico. And so then the question is, are they willing to put up with all of the working conditions in Texas? You know, is it worth the money? Right? So that becomes the calculation that people have to make. So where are all the teachers going instead? Well, I mean, we can say that they're leaving the government-run public schools and maybe going into private schools. I mean, that's what I did, being let go from the university. Then, and if you teach at a university, you have no certifications or what do you call it, accreditations, credentials to be able to teach at a government-run public school. So you can go into a private school, right? And that's where probably, and I know at the school where I'm going right now, one of the other teachers quit the public school because of what he was being asked to teach. All right, so part of the problem that we are seeing in education, you know, this is sort of like urban legend, no, not urban legend, a little bit higher than urban legend, but it's this kind of conventional wisdom that teachers come from the bottom 30% of university students, right? So what does it mean, bottom 30%? And so if you Google that, you'll see that it's you know, you can just take it as it is, face value. They're not the brightest 70%. They're the least brightest 30%. And it's a generalization, as with all racializations, categorizations that we do in this podcast. It means that there are a lot of exceptions, of course. Some of the brightest people can become high school teachers or public school teachers, but it doesn't necessarily mean all of them. And one might try to be upset, especially if you're a teacher, you might be upset at that. And a lot of articles that were written trying to push back against that is, oh, this is the way they came up with that figure. It's by, you know, SAT score, it's by this or that. But you don't have to do that. It's just logical, right? Because if you think about it, teaching is kind of easy, right? And so people who don't want to be challenged too much, you can just go into teaching. There's vacations, which if you have a family, matches with your own children's vacation times. Also, when they go to school, you go to school. When they come back from school, you come back from school. So it's really convenient, which is why back in the day, a lot of mothers, a lot of women went into teaching because it was really convenient. And it's not really all that difficult, really. The first couple of years, maybe, as you get your teaching material together and your rhythm and what works and what doesn't work. But after that, you sort of follow a plan and it's not really so bad. But teaching is also, we can say that it's kind of easy if you compare it to other majors like engineering, right? Engineering is a meat grinder. I've known a lot of engineering students, and it basically sort of like takes your life away, right? Because you have no free time. You're constantly working on projects. I guess I haven't never taken an engineering class, but I'm assuming that unless you are gifted at math, and I'm talking gifted at math, where math comes pretty easy to you, anything you do there is going to be somewhat difficult. So compared to teaching, engineering is really hard. Finance, very hard. I've talked to people in business schools, and there are certain what do you call it, career choices that require a tremendous amount of math. Even art schools, you need talent, right? And so if you're like someone like me and you don't have a lot of talent, you're just mediocre at pretty much everything. Yeah, you can't get into the art school. So if you think about it too, the best students, the brightest students, the students that have been told by their parents and all their teachers that they are super smart, they're gifted, they're going to go places, and validated by all of their performance in these schools and contests and all this other stuff, they go for the jobs that pay the most, right? So whether it's engineering or law or medicine, but also, if you think about it, 20 years ago, I believe this was right before the 2000 dot-com bubble. Right prior to that, a lot of the best and brightest students wanted to go into the stock market because that's where you could make a lot of money. And so they're not thinking about going into teaching, right? They want to go where all the money is. Hedge fund managers, that kind of stuff was always in the news. Also these days, well, maybe not so much these days, but prior to the big crypto crash a couple of years ago, when Bitcoin went from 60,000 down to 10,000 or 9,000 or something like that, everyone, or the best minds, wanted to get into crypto. I had students who were working on that type of thing, very much technology oriented. And so what are they doing? They're chasing the money. If they are among the best and the brightest, that means they are keeping their ear to the ground to try to figure out which jobs are paying the most. And other students are not really interested in that. They're just partying, they're having a good time in college, what's up with all this, worrying about money stuff. And so a lot of these guys go crypto, and then who's left? Right. And so then you go, well, so what am I going to do? Oh, teaching, that's a pretty steady job. Now, I know I'm painting a pretty negative picture, but obviously it's not everybody. But there are a lot of education students that are getting into education because it's a pretty easy gig. What about professors? And because I am a professor, isn't that the rule? Like, you can make fun of yourself, people like yourself. So if I'm Asian, I can make Asian jokes. So if I'm a professor, I can make professor jokes. So one of the things that I used to say in class is that I would ask, what are the qualifications to be a professor, right? There's no accreditation, there's no feedback loop, and tenured professors don't care about course evaluations by students, right? So what is the qualification to become a professor? And I would jokingly say in class, I have to say that twice, right? Is you need to be dysfunctional, right? Because people who are willing to subject themselves sometimes to 10 years of doctoral research just to pump out a dissertation, it's because they have some kind of problem that they're wrestling with that no matter how many books they read, they can't find a solution. So they got to go to school themselves to try to work it out themselves. And so a lot of not all, but many people who go into grad school, they're doing it because they got a personal problem. They have a dysfunction. In my case, it was identity issues, right? Understanding race dynamics. And so in a way, being dysfunctional is a requirement of becoming a professor. I always got a good laugh from that, especially when you look at a lot of the other professors who are teaching in university. They're kind of like self-absorbed, right? So is that what makes a good teacher? I certainly was in the bottom third of my class. I will admit that. My senior year in college, I said stuff like D for diploma, right? So I was very, very dysfunctional, but I think it made me a better instructor, right? So I cleaned up my act and I started studying. And so when I started teaching, I thought, I decided that I was going to use myself as the fictional student in the classroom, that if I was sitting in that classroom, what do I need to say and do to make me stay awake, to get my attention, to try to convey to this person, myself, that this is worth staying awake and coming to class to listen to, right? And that's what guided a lot of my teaching philosophy. But also there's anecdotal evidence, like one of my kids, he was in the education school, school of education for like a year, and he got out because the people who are trying to be teachers are not really that bright. They were struggling with basic arithmetic, and they would say, why do I have to learn this? Excuse me, well, you're going to be a teacher and students may ask you about this, you should know how to do it. But that was their complaint. Why do I have to learn how to do this? You know, because clearly what I have to teach the students is about gender theory, you know, all this other kind of stuff. So that's what's important, not reading and writing and logic and math, you know, none of that stuff. And so that was sort of pervasive through the educational classes that he was taking. So he got out of it pretty quickly. Finally, I do want to mention, so if in case you lost track, I'm trying to say there is no teacher shortage. It's just that the field has become so toxic that most people are just simply not going to go into the field in the first place. They're going to seek alternatives. Corey DeAngelis, who is big on Twitter, what does he say? He calls himself the school choice evangelist, which I thought was really kind of cool. He asks where all the money is going, right? And so Biden recently said, oh, we got to increase the teacher salaries. But he did a thought experiment. This is similar to something that I do in class. He said, so in America right now, average spending per student nationwide, I guess, is $18,000 per student per year. And so each class generally on average has 24 students per class. This means that 24 students, $18,000 a year, each class is getting $432,000. The average teacher salary is $67,000. So where's the rest of it going, right? Where's all that money? What is it? Over $350,000 per class. Where's it going? And obviously it's going to administrative fees, you know, principal, assistant principal. Then you've got to talk about all the other programs that people are putting into schools, like DEI programs, you know, all whatnot. Also new building construction, etc. You see all of these, you know, phenomena, which is sucking up a lot of money. I know in big cities, the superintendent, because the school districts are so massive, superintendents are paid millions, right? And it's not even based on doing a good job. It's just that's what they are being paid. So is there a problem? No, not really. If this was a market type situation, the signal would be to everyone that these schools have to shut down, right? That these schools are not worth all of that money. And so therefore they must close. And now all those teachers have to find other employment. If they want to teach at a private school, they have to show that they are worth their pay. And this is how you get rid of all those lazy, I don't teach anymore, tenured teachers in public schools, right? So a lot of teachers in public schools, they know they can't get fired unless they do something absolutely horrible. And so they just have to not do something absolutely horrible, but they are horrible teachers and they're tenured after 3 years automatically, which means, you know, you now all have so many teachers who really aren't trying to do a good job any longer. And so if you close down those schools, get rid of the bad teachers, then and get the government out of education entirely, then you'll see lots of changes. Costs will come down, quality of education will go up, the curriculum will improve as well, and the curriculum will be shaped according to the demands of the students who are going to that school. In other words, what I did Was I catered to what students wanted? They wanted to hear something different. They wanted to hear something practical. And so therefore, I would imagine a lot of students, even on the lower levels, that's what they want and desire. And so all you have to do is set up a school which teaches them that, in addition to reading, writing, and arithmetic. Well, that's it for this episode. I hope that I'll see you in the next one.